not be supported. Thank you.
Beautiful speech.
You want a copy?
The Honourable Peter Phelps.
Walks like a choke. Walks like a choke.
Mr. President.
There's a rooster. There's a rooster.
Time to get out the egg beater.
Order. Well, honourable members have...
Mr. President, the Greens have spoken in great detail about chickens. I quote Dr. John Kay. This bill is based on the growing understanding of birds as social, sentient beings that need to develop complex relationships and whose well-being is only fulfilled when they can forage for food. Further on, he says, those who see hens purely as industrial units, not as sentient beings with instincts, desires and social relationships. Mr. David Shoebridge said, chickens are relatively intelligent and social animals. Anyone who has experience with chickens recognises that they are intelligent and social creatures, to which some horrid member replied, only compared with Greens voters. Mr. Shoebridge went on to say, when you spend time interacting with chickens, you realise that they are quite sociable animals, and they are clearly animals of some intelligence. Well, on hearing this revelatory news, I simply couldn't wait to get back home and find out if it was true. Members will know that I keep chickens.
The chook whisperer.
So I went into the chicken run, and I put to Pickles the proposition raised by the Greens, and she found it was sound but simplistic. Whiskey, a Marxist chicken, said that the Greens had completely failed to understand the inherent class structure in chicken society. Pebbles merely queried if a rooster crowed in a henhouse and nobody heard it, could it have said to have been crowing? Snowy replied, of course it happened because an objective reality is not reliant upon subjective observation. Pecky and Becky, the anarcho-feminist chickens, said that the whole egg-laying system was a tool of patriarchal oppression and that I would be in trouble if I even thought of bringing a rooster into the henhouse. They also asked for the purpose of Hansard, could chicken please be spelled C-H-Y-C-K-Y-N? Becky and Ginger got into a fight over whether the true conservative chicken is one of tradition or liberty, while Frilly, a Nietzschean, rambled on about chicken and super chicken before handing me a list of those she thought could be disposed of to, quote, improve the situation, unquote. Now, Mr. President, members, well, certainly Green members at least, may be surprised to find that these conversations did not in fact take place. You see, Mr. President, the simple fact is this. Chickens are not intelligent. They are not sociable, at least any more than ants are sociable. And they are certainly not sociable enough to invite them into the club. In fact, chickens are stupid. Indeed, I look at the Greens and their friends in the extreme animal rights movement and I'm reminded of Mrs. Tweedy's words in the movie Chicken Run. Quote, they're chickens, you dolt. Apart from you, they're the most stupid creatures on this planet. But at the heart of all of this, green extremist rhetoric is the crude anthropomorphism that's a stock and trade of the lunatic animal rights movement. Who can forget Peter's People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, there's a misnomer if ever there was one, their desire to rename fish sea kittens. That's the sort of intellectual capacity that we're dealing with here. Now, chickens are stupid. And indeed, how stupid they are can be evinced by the life and times of Mike the Headless Rooster. Mike the Headless Rooster.
Its name was changed to protect.
It's totally inappropriate for the government whip to refer to the leader of the government as being headless. giant rooster.
Could be a cape, could be worse, could be a cape on. On the 10th of September 1945, a 5.5-month-old Wyandotte rooster was picking through the dust of Fruita, Colorado. The unsuspecting bird had never looked so delicious as he did then, that famous day. Lloyd Olson, his human owner, went out and with a skillful blow executed against the neck of the chicken, dispatched its head. The chicken staggered around like most freshly terminated poultry, but the determined bird shook off the traumatic event and never looked back. In fact, Mike returned to his job of being a chicken. He pecked for food, even though he didn't have a head, and preened his feathers just like the rest of the barnyard buddies. When Olson found Mike the next morning, he decided that if Mike had that much will to live, he would figure out a way to feed and water him. With an eyedropper, Mike was given grain and water, and it became obvious that Mike was special. A week later, he drove him 250 miles to the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. The sceptical scientists, what beautiful words they are, the sceptical scientists were eager to answer all the questions regarding Mike's amazing ability to survive with no head. It was determined that the axe blade had missed the jugular vein and a clot had formed, preventing Mike from bleeding to death. In the next 18 months that he lived, Mike, the headless chicken wonder, had grew from a mere 2.5 pounds to nearly 8 pounds. In a Gail Meyer interview, Olson said Mike was, quote, robust chicken, a fine specimen of a chicken, except for not having a head. Sadly, he died some 18 months later when the eyedropper used to clean his esophagus was left behind and he died. But the fact of the matter is that, there's not a great deal of intellectualism amongst the chicken community. Indeed, the whole ideal of an aimless creature dependent on welfare and showing limited signs of sentient behaviour, all the while lacking a head, is clearly analogous to the New South Wales Parliamentary Greens Party itself.
Scramble the egg.
Thank you, Mr. President. And getting back to the bill at hand, I do realise that there may be a problem in labelling a product. The question is, what is the proper response to such behaviour? Well, for the Greens and their socialist allies, what do? They go running home to mama. Regulation and big government. Always regulation, always big government. Have you got a problem? Legislate. Is there an issue? Legislate. Are you upset? Legislate. That's the mentality of that side of the House. And when you hear a particular section of an industry clamouring for government regulation, I'm smelling special interests at play here. Special interests. The Greens in the pocket of special interests. And it's interesting, the nature of the emails which we've been receiving, or as I like to call them, eggs and spam, the emails themselves are pro forma in their substance, but the titles tend to give it away. And what do the titles say? End battery farming. No cages. Free the chooks. This is not an issue about labelling in this instance. This is a Trojan horse to get stuck in to commercial chicken farming arrangements in Australia. This is a nasty little Trojan horse, and while Dr. John Kay will not acknowledge that, it's quite clear that those people he has brought in to send us emails, to spam us with emails, are clear about what their true objectives are. So, the other thing about it is that all legislation has unintended consequences, not just those which are envisaged by them. So it gets back to the original question which asked, what is the appropriate response in those instances where people believe that a product is not labelled correctly? Well, the proper response to the free-range issue is not to force anyone to label anything, but to use for some private label to label their food free-range or some other term, and to define the rules that allow other food companies to use this term, and then trademark the brand name so the government or another firm cannot take them over. A private certification system will satisfy those who only wish to buy free-range eggs without placing a burden on those who wish to sell battery eggs. It will be up to the private label company to enforce the use of their free-range label brand. You know, this is the sort of thing which is a Made in Australia or a Heart Foundation tick seal, which could be placed on eggs which feature certain free-range things. No, they can call them whatever they like. They might call them super eggs or real eggs, or my favourite, green eggs, because I look forward to the day where Dr. K goes into his local cafe and orders green eggs and ham. It would be appropriate, I think. For those who are concerned about the free-range issue, can purchase eggs which are specifically branded as such by this private branding arrangement, and those who don't think it's a valid issue can purchase everything else, which in most cases will probably be cheaper. Anyone who sells battery eggs will not be able to use this new free-range approved logo, and if they do, they open themselves for a very expensive claim for trademark infringement. What we do not need to do, in the situation which is now being suggested, is for the government to decide to initiate force by mandatory labelling, as opposed to having consumers choose. In a free market, which of course the Greens despise, one would have private certification which would evaluate egg production, such as Choice does today for products. The difference is that consumers would be free to disregard this information if they thought it was inaccurate or did not apply to their situation. Furthermore, such boards would not be subject to political pull and lobbying that goes on in today's government systems. Lastly, no certification board will be able to use the power of the police to force their opinions down anyone's throat. The board would have to earn the citizens' respect by providing consistently good decisions over a number of years. Consumers could then use this information to make their own judgment regarding whether or not it is free range, based on the determining criteria of the certifying company, as opposed to some bureaucrat charging consumers thousands of dollars to make a decision for them. But statists, like the Greens, view the citizen as an idiot who cannot make a decision for himself, and therefore demand that a government official must make it for him. This begs the question: if an individual is not capable of making a simple decision affecting their own lives, such as whether I want to buy eggs which are labelled free range, how is that same individual able to make the decision to elect officials to public office, and such a decision presupposes that he is able to judge how the elected official judges? The government's job is to protect rights, not to regulate people's affairs. If a company sells a product as being free range and it is not, then the purchaser has a right to demand legal compensation, and that's the only valid role of government. A private certification system in this instance, Mr. President, is cheaper, more effective, and can give effect to what the Greens actually want to do. By bringing in the government, all they are showing is their true colours, and that is an end to the commercial chicken industry in Australia and a socialised collectivist system of government and commerce.
Beat that, Charlie.